let's get started. This is going to be fun. I love this. All right, guys. Thanks everyone for joining. This is awesome. Glad to be here. Today I'm presenting on best practices and tips when you're doing Power BI. Even if you started using Power BI or planning to start, or you're already using it, maybe a lot of things you guys are already doing. But this is the list of the things. What I'm going to share today is more of what I am doing for last 5-6 years since Power BI was made available. With time I learned, and every time when I start a new project or start a new report or anything, like there are a few things which I always take care of and I start with. So I divided into 4 different sections. As you can see here, there's a data prep section. There is a options and settings in Power BI we have. And then there's a data modeling and visualization sections. That doesn't mean that I have going to, there's a lot more than this as well, but these are like one of my common things which I always do. And that's what I'm going to share in this particular presentation. And during this, please feel free to stop in. I might not be able to look at the chat, but if you have any question, and moderator can just interrupt if you feel like. I'm open either way. Just quickly about me, Gavin introduced me. Thank you very much, Gavin. Again, my name is Parvinder Chana, and people with the short name say Parv Chana. For me, saying Parv is a little bit tough. Parvinder is easier, but I don't mind whatever works for you guys. I run a consulting company here in Vancouver. It's called Parameterization IT Solutions, and I'm primarily focused on Power BI. Before Power BI came in, I was more involved in software development and all this stuff. But for the last 5-6 years, pretty much into Power BI, and I think I live in that world, not looking into anything else. Again, my LinkedIn is here. Recently, I started a YouTube channel from January 2022. This year, pretty much posting a video every day. Let's see how long I can stretch that, but I'm trying my best. A lot of those videos are more on real-time business problems, which I come across either through Power BI community or personally I come across, and that's what I'm trying to share with the community. I'm a data platform MVP and also a Microsoft Power BI community super users. One of the things I really want to highlight here, if you are using Power BI and you have questions around that, please do use Power BI Community Forum. It's a great place to ask questions, to learn from others. And this is from where I learned a lot of things and I give back to the community. And there are amazing people over there who can really help you with solve your questions or guide you. So I always highly recommend use Power BI Community Forum. But again, you can connect with me and reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email, no problem at all. All right, let's quickly get into, I will quickly walk through these steps and then we'll show that as well, what those actually mean in action. So in data prep, these are the few things which I always do when I start a new report or a new project. The first thing I do is, let's say if I go to a project and they have a SQL as in their data source or any other data source, like maybe Excel file and all this stuff, I always first create a parameter which contains the information for the connection as much as possible, that whatever those connections are, try to store in a parameter. The reason behind that is I learned with time, like let's say, for example, you have a SQL server, you connect it to 5 tables, you bring in the model, you start working on that, and then you continue adding more tables. And by the time you have like 20, 25, 30, 40 tables in the model, and then all of a sudden, if you need to change the connection string, like going from one server to a different server, one database to different database for whatever reason, then you need to go to each table and make the changes. And I learned it in a hard way. I never used to use parameters for those kind of things. Now, my first thing is, as soon as I start a project, I create a parameter, whether it's Excel files, save the path where the file is coming from, it's a database, whatever the server name, database name, schema name, I always store in parameter and start from there. When you start a project, it looks like it's a small thing, but in long run, it helps a lot, because for the management point of view, from the scalability point of view, it becomes really easy. So I always do that. The second thing is remove extra columns. I don't remember that I come across any project where people bring all type of columns in the model. They try to bring everything. They say, we don't know when we will use it. Maybe we need it. When the question comes, maybe we use it. First thing is you drop that column. You really don't need that column in your model. The reason behind that is if it's easy to go back and add it. If you really, let's say you're developing 20 different reports on this, you're bringing these columns in the model, only what you are using, but you're developing a 21st report and all of a sudden you can't come across, oh, we did not bring this column, and then you go back and bring it. The reason why you don't want to bring the extra column is first because of you don't want to clutter your data model, because end of the day, I always look into this is, okay, we are building a model and a data set to serve the self-serve, and the people will connect to the data set and they will use and they will create the reports the way they want it. So you want your model to be very neat and clean. And the second thing is, like, if it's your very large data set, you don't want to bring columns to just loaded in the memory, and then your data set is really, really large for no reason. And with the fear of that I might use this column and and without knowing that whether you will use it or not, first thing for me is don't bring it. If you really need it, I will bring it back whenever, if I come in the future, I need it, I will bring that column back. Now, when we go to the columns, there's two part of things which I highly and always recommend. Like if you have a RDBMS backend system, like a SQL Server, Oracle, or Postgre, or MySQL, creative views. I always people I see directly connect to the database, directly connect to the tables, and then they bring all the columns from the tables, and then they, in Power Query, they start manipulating. Like if you have, like, of course, in Excel, if your data source is in Excel or some file data you're reading from Excel, you have to do the whole transformation in Power Query. But if you are using RDBMS, your transformation can be, a lot of transformation can be pushed back to in the view. So I always create views, a middle layer, which is then feed to Power BI. And in that middle layer, I put, okay, whatever the columns I need to put in there. Let's say if table has a 20 column, and for my Power BI, I only need 5 columns. From view, I only bring those 5 columns instead of bringing everything and then removing in Power Query. But yes, if it's a known database based source like a web API or Excel files, then of course there's nothing you can do about it. But one thing you want to do it, if your Excel has like a 20 columns and you are only working with 10 columns, you drop those 10 columns once you connect to the Excel file. And in the model, you only load the 10 columns what are required at the end of the day. A column type, it's really, really critical. I see models when I go like a takeover project, I see there is like a column types are everywhere. Like sometimes the column types are not even defined. They are any, like it's like a text or numeric. Do your due diligence to make sure the column type is correct. And specifically when it comes to the numbers column, because that's one of the very has an impact on in memory when the data get loaded in memory. Like if you have let's say you have an amount column or sales amount column or discount column or those columns where the maximum decimal places is 4-digit. I've seen people have a column type being set as a number, not as the fixed decimal number. They usually have a decimal number. The decimal number is more designed for if you have a more than 4-digit after decimals. But if it is up to 4-digit, your data is not going to be more than 4 decimal places. Always make it to a fixed decimal number. In Power Query, the symbol looks like as in a $sign, but that doesn't mean it is a currency type column. What does that mean is that this is a fixed decimal number column. And I will share a blog post which is done by Gilbert, another MVP from 4Move, and he has shown that how changing the column from decimal number to the fixed decimal number have reduced the size of the model. So it's a big thing. So do pay attention to column types and make sure your column types are correct. Column names, I really, this is like one of those things I cannot handle when the column names are really, really poor in the model. I see, product table, people connect to the product table, and in the product table, there's a product ID, and then there's a description. Now they bring the description column as it is. Now, nobody knows what the description means, right? You want to make sure that you're renaming the column name. And again, if your source is database based source, like you are creating the views, make your column names, in the views itself, whatever the business name is, what the user friendly name is. Thinking about like a natural query language. If tomorrow business is going to ask the question using Power BI model, hey, give me sales by product. If you don't have the product column name, of course you can set the synonymous for the column names, but why not bring as clean column names as possible, and then it becomes very, very easy. All these things take a very little time to begin with, but they go in. When your model grows and you're building a enterprise model, these small things does count a lot in long run, because once you have a lot of reports being developed on a model, then it is very hard to go back and make those changes. So these initial steps, these initial things are really, really important. And parameters for test and production data. I learned this in a harder way. When I used to work, I always have like if the database or the data set at the source is like 20 million rows, I will load 20 million rows. I will wait, like if I'm doing the development, and I will wait for the rows to load and all that stuff. And then it takes time. It wastes my time that while I'm waiting on those data is getting loaded. So now with the parameters, what I usually do is like when I'm in a development, I pull only like a sample size of maybe 10,000 rows or 20,000 rows or whatever is best case scenario. And then when it is published in the Power BI service, you change the parameter setting to productions, and then you can reload load the full data. Or if you're using incremental refresh, yes, that can do as well. That with the incremental refresh, you have a smaller data set in your when you're doing the development, but not all the time we have the opportunity to use incremental refresh. I have one data source which is around for one of my customers, which has a 30 million rows, but unfortunately they don't have any way to identify a modified date or the new record insert date. So there's no way that we can have the incremental refresh on their data model. So every time it's a full data get loaded, it takes around 15-20 minutes, and it's the nature of the data we are getting. We cannot use incremental refresh. Now, when I'm working on that model, I just pull like around 20,000, 30,000 rows. They have like 4 or 5 different fact tables, and my development process is much, much faster. And once it is published in the cloud and the parameter value I change to production, and then everything get loaded. These are the things which is really things what I like to show as well, just to make sure that it's not pure theory here. Just going to show here a quick model. So here in this case, this is one of actually my real-time model. I changed the IP address to something different to not to disclose the IP address. So if you look into this particular model, I have around 25 different dimension tables here, and I have around 6 or 7 fact tables. So there's all in this model. It's not that large, but it's a comparatively medium-sized model where we have around 35 different tables coming in from our database. And then on top of that, there are some external files which are coming from the SharePoint as well. So what I have done here is like I stored, like they use PostgreSQL. So I have stored the parameters, the SQL server name, the database name, even the schema name, because there might be a different schemas. They have like a multiple schemas, and I store the schema name as well. And then in my queries, like for example, in dim cancel, this particular query, if you go to the source, you will see, I think it's big enough in the size. Like I am using the server name and the database name as parameters as part of my connection. In the end, when I go to the navigation, you will see I use the schema name as part of the schema as well. So now this gives me a flexibility. Each and every table loaded here is using those parameters. And tomorrow, actually this happened with this particular client. They were using AWS as an Postgre where it was hosted, and later they moved to a different environment all of a sudden. And then for me, because it was designed it in a way, as soon as they moved to the different location, I just went in Power BI service, changed the parameter values and did the refresh. For me, it was like a 5-minute job. For them, it took whatever time to move the server from location A to location B. But for me, on my end, because it was designed in a way, it took me like whatever the time it took to refresh, right? So that's pretty much it. And if that was not done, for example, it means what I'm supposed to do is come and open this model file, change each and every tables connection to the new connection, and then upload the file and refresh. So that's not a too much ask, but why if we can have simplify this process by using the parameters, why not we do that, right? So in my opinion, that's really very, very helpful. And every time I start a project, the first thing is when I'm doing the connection settings, I start creating these parameters and start storing the values in there and using the parameters. Even the external data files, as I mentioned, they have they're using some files which are not in the database, but as an external data files. I stored the path for that in the parameter as well, and the files get read from there. In case tomorrow they move the file from location A to location B or whatever the reason, and then it's very, very easy without opening the model, without coming to Power BI. We can just change the parameter in Power BI service and everything will flow through. So I would highly recommend you do that. That's like a starting point. It's a very small thing, but it goes a long way. Other thing, I just actually have another model to show here quickly. So this one is pretty much based on this Excel file. This is my demo file. Again, here I have stored the path of Excel file where all the data files are. And one of the advantage, I was working on a project with one of the client in Florida, and his source was a Excel files on his computer. And now we were exchanging the files back and forth, and it was very, very tough for there were around 15, 20 different Excel files we were reading. So when we have these parameters and, I just change the path of the parameter, and when he was exploring the file or he was using it when we were in a development phase, and he will just go and change and point to the files on his local computer, wherever it was, and everything will just flow through. So again, it's not necessarily only for the RDBMS or those kind of connection strings, but you can also use it for your file system as well. So push everything, whatever is the static values, which are used in anywhere in when you're development, when you're pulling the data, put them into the parameters and reuse them as much as possible. It's very, very easy to change. Again, here I talked about the data load. I have a parameter, I call it data load. You can call it whatever you want. It's a development or production. So basically what I'm doing is, just for the demo sake, in sales, I'm using my parameter to check if it's a development, then I'm getting the orders which are on or before 2010, and that gives me that sample size. And if it is not development, then I'm getting the full load. So this has helped me when I'm working here in development. I don't need the full data load. I just work on the sample data set. Other thing I mentioned about, for example, here in customers table, for example, if you look into this is again just a demo I'm giving. Like for example, in the reading from the Excel file, we have approximately whatever 25, 30 different columns. Now those are okay. Those columns are there. But end of the day, what I need is I need only 3 columns. I need a customer key, I need a geography key because for relationship, and I need the customer name. That's it. The rest of the stuff I just dropped it. I don't need it. If tomorrow there is something comes out to be, I really need, which I don't know whether I need it or not today. But if let's say something comes up tomorrow, I just have to come back here and the change include that column in the model, and it's much easier. So you want to start with that tiny, as tidy as possible, as clean as possible, and grow with time if required. But yeah, if you already know what columns you need, then of course include those columns. And of course, the type you want to make sure to change. And one thing I wanted to point out about this $sign mentioned about decimal number. So there's a decimal number and there's a fixed decimal number. then you want to make sure that if you are not more than 4 decimal points, then make sure you pick fixed decimal number. As I said, it decreases the size of the model. And as I mentioned, the Gilbert, again, this is his post. And he has a great article here, like how I saved 40% on my Power BI data set size. And here in this particular article, I'm not going to go through this, but he's talking about changing from decimal number to the fixed decimal number, that how his model has changed. So it's really interesting post to read. But do go through this and learn what does this means. But in nutshell, if you don't have a decimal number going beyond 4 decimal places, your first thing is to change it to fixed decimal number, and that will decrease the size of the model. I think those were the few things which I really wanted to showcase how I use it. These things takes a small efforts to begin with, but once it becomes a part of your development process, this is part of my development process. Start creating parameters, remove extra columns, make sure the column types are correct, and and then I have always a parameter for whether test data or production data. And I start with this. This is now in every report. I do that all the time, whether I use it or not. But that's how I start it, so that it becomes much easier to work with. All right. Let me pause here for a second. Do we have any question, or should we keep going?
Yeah, so there was one question from Raul, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. So just when you're using parameters, can you show in the advanced editor how you actually use the parameter? So obviously you give the parameter name, and then how do you actually implement it? If you don't mind showing that quickly.
Yeah.
And then if you have the URL for that, for the ForMu blog post, if you could paste that as well. I mean, I'll try and find it in the meantime if you don't have it.
I'll probably have it handy here. Let me, okay, I have it here. Just give me copy link, and let me see if I can paste it in the chat window there. Paste. Yeah, all right, here you go.
Yep.
Perfect. So so parameter name. Okay, let's. I will show how I will use it. Let's say, for example, I'm gonna randomly pick a Excel file here. Excel is much easier to work with, but let's say if, I'm gonna pick this. Let's see. Let's pick this file, client visit. I don't know what the file contains. So there's a sheet 1 in here. Okay, that's perfectly fine. So now this is what by default, when you connect to the Excel file, this is what will happen, right? There is a source, there is a navigation, there is a promoted headers, and this all happens. One thing I always do is especially when I'm connecting to Excel files, what Excel does is it scans first, I think, 1,000 rows and set the type of the column. Especially when you're connecting to the Excel files, make sure that you are paying a close attention to the data types, because what happens is, let's say you have a column with a number and text, and first 1,000 rows has all numbers, and then later in the data it comes like a text value. What Excel is going to do is scan, I think, at first 1,000 rows, and it's going to detect the data type to be number. But maybe you in that particular column later in the maybe in the 1500th row there is a text value, right? But you know that your data is of a text type. Instead of being auto detect by Excel what the data type is, make sure, especially when you're working with Excel or CSV files, make sure that you are actually closely looking at whether the data type is correct or not. And I've seen this many times. People say, okay, this is working fine. And when they have a new data come into the Excel file and one specific column, which is suppose, let's say ID column, it was all numbers, and all of a sudden there's a text came in, and then they say my refresh fails. It was working fine till yesterday, but now it is not working. when you know that your ID column can contain a text and number, rather than being the type to be whatever auto-detected by Excel, you should manually change it to whatever it's supposed to be. So yeah, that's the one thing I really, especially non-database relational database sources, it's important to pay attention to the type. So in this case, for example, here is my going back to the question which Raul asked is like, of course, this is the path it has, and then here it is the name of the file. If I have to do it, what I will do is I will create a new parameter. I'm just going to go call it whatever, like sample path, right? And one thing I usually do is maybe I just uncheck required. What I will do here is go back to my sheet 1 and go to source. I will pick the path from here. Like that's much easier to do that up to before the file name, and then come back to my sample path and then give the value in here. So now I know this is what the path is. I usually like to be required, and then you should change the type to text as well. If you know the different path you can choose between, like let's say you're sharing the files between your peers and then they have a different path and you know what 3-4 different paths are, you can actually create a list of values and have all those paths. If you really don't want to type in, then user can pick it from there. And like we did for the production and development. So once this is done here, you can, when you're connecting with the Excel file, you can, when you click on the source here, the easiest way is it can actually ask you here the file path. As you can see, you can have the parameter here as well. And what it will do is you can pick the parameter and then you concatenate the file name with that. But what I do, because I usually come here and then can open with the advanced editor as well, but then I give my a path of my should be in here. Is that what we called it? Yeah. So I replaced the portion which was the path with my parameter name and then concatenated it with the file name. And if you want, really, you can store the file name as well, but it's up to you. And then that's pretty much it. Now this thing has been changed and everything should work. And if I come back here and change the path to something else and XYZ, and then of course it will no refresh because there is no data in that particular path. So that's how I usually do it. So for same with the SQL Server and all the stuff, once you connect, it has the IP address, so the server name, database name, and the schema name. Whatever the parameter name you give, you can replace it in the source and the navigation. Or of course, you can come into the advanced editor and change it. It's pretty much the same thing. It's up to you, whatever is convenient to you. Did that answer the question? Yes.
Yeah, I think it was good. I think Raul's timing was maybe a little bit slow on the response, but yeah, looked good to me.
Yeah, perfect. So let's get going. So now this is again a settings. These are important. We have probably you guys all gone through this many times, but I still like to talk about this. Daytime is a big thing. I'm always, the reason why I like to talk about daytime is as I mentioned, I'm pretty much involved in Power BI community forum, and I spend like hours and hours there. And there's no single day that out of, like, if I'm reading 20-30 Power BI community posts, there is out of those 30 posts or 50 posts, 50% is related to date and time, something to do with the time intelligence. And that's like and what I found is people are missing the very basic fundamentals about the time intelligence. And that's what is no. I think people were starting on this journey on Power BI. They miss few things on the time intelligence. So I want to walk through what this global setting is and why we should be turning it off, and also the auto relationship. Usually by default, detect auto relationship is turned on in the settings. This is not a global settings. There are, if you guys know, there are two different settings in Power BI option settings. One is global and one is report setting. Global settings, of course, are global. When you start a new report, all those global settings are applied on the report, but the report settings are which is only for that specific report. Auto relationship, detect auto relation is a report level setting. It is not a global setting. And I think there is idea on ideas forum to make this as in a global setting as well. And the reason auto relationship, what I've seen is auto detect to turn it off is why this is important, because if it is kept on by default, which is on, Power BI, of course, try to connect the tables together. Once you load the tables in Power Query and you close and apply, and Power BI detects whatever the relationship is going to be. If it's a SQL based, they are pretty correct, and it all works perfectly fine most of the time. But what I've seen is, for example, you are working with a very small data set. You are an Excel file with the 10 orders in it, and then you have a product table, and then you have in your fact table or the sales order table, you have a 10 products, all unique rows, unique product, and then you have a product dimension, all unique dimension. Of course, dimension is a unique, and maybe Power BI detect it as a one-to-one relationship between the fact table, sales table, and the product table. And when it is going to detect, because it sees, okay, both sides is the unique value, maybe this is a one-to-one relationship, and one-to-one relationship, it's going to be cross. That's completely wrong at that point. I'm working with the sample data set, and it has a lesser number of rows. Not there are unique records, and it detected the wrong relationship. And what will happen is if you don't pay attention to the relationship, when you bring the load more data or upload like a production data, your relationship will fail because the now sales contains same product, multiple rows, and it is not one-to-one anymore. It is one-to-many, which is supposed to be the right relationship. So auto detect does work a lot of the time, but sometimes I've seen the cross filter direction is set to both. Sometimes I've seen one-to-one relationship because it detects the based on the data you have. And then those does not go very well when you bring more data. So if your auto detect is turned off, it does not take that long to go back, look into the tables, and make sure that you are manually creating the relationship. You are picking the correct columns from your dimension tables to the fact tables, and you are also making sure the filter direction is in a single, not both, because there are tons of articles about that you should always avoid your filter direction to cross filter direction to both in your relationship. I'm not going to talk about that. There are articles which I can share the link with you guys, and a lot of things talked about that. So pretty much in your head it should be that the cross filter direction when you're creating the relationship should be single. For me, if I take over any project where somebody says, my report is not working, I'm not getting the correct result, or performance is slow, and the first thing I look at the model, and the second thing I look in the model is how tables are connected, and if there is any cross filter direction to both. If there is, then the question comes, okay, why it is there? What is the reason that your cross filter direction is set to both? So I always turn off in my settings to auto relationship, detect auto relationship turn off. But again, this is a report based setting. So every time you start a new report, go to option and setting and turn off auto relationship so that when you load the data, you bring the tables in and you are manually setting the relationship. Never let it auto detect. Again, this is what my preference is. This is what I highly recommend because I've seen things are going wrong because the relationships are not correct, because they keep on people say my report is working and now all of a sudden stop working, and then you turn out to be the relationship is not correct because auto detect did the relationship which is not the right relationship. And there's a setting for a cross filtering to cross highlight. I think 90% of reports we work with by default, the setting is when the two visuals interact with each other. Usually it is cross highlight, right? And you have a table matrix visual and a bar chart. When you click a row in a table matrix visual, for example, and the bar chart only highlights the area, right? So that's a cross highlight, which is a default behavior in Power BI visuals. And there is a setting which turned it to cross filtering. Usually I've seen a lot of reports are usually people prefer cross filter. So you can actually change those settings in options and setting. I'm going to quickly walk through these settings where they are in case you don't know. I'm pretty sure that you guys have seen this many times, but just to make sure that oops. All right, let's get to my Power BI report here. So if you go into options and settings under options. So that's as I said, there's a global and there's a current file. So any setting under current file is applied only to this Power BI file. So data load settings, if you look in there, there's a time intelligence, auto date time for new files. So this is turned off. You should always turn it off. And I will be talking a little bit more about auto date time. Just give me a quick second. And in the data load, again, there is a time intelligence. If you don't have turned it off global, by default, it is on. If you kept that on and then you want this to auto, first of all, I don't see any reason why you should have this on. I would highly recommend to turn it off. And but let's say if you have turned it on and you have a old files where this time intelligence setting is turned on, you can actually have a report based setting as well where you can have an auto date time off, right? So this is a report based setting. And other settings which I really wanted to talk about is change default visual interaction, which I mentioned, from cross highlighting to cross filtering. People prefer cross filtering. Again, if you, I don't know what your use case is, but I've seen is a lot of the time people prefer cross filtering, and then what people I've seen doing is like they go and manually change through the edit interactions to the cross filter. You can do this setting here, and then all your visuals will cross filter each other. And one of the other settings which I auto detect new relationship. This should be automatic. This should be turned off. In this case, it was on because this is the older file I have. So this is what I will always, when I start a report, I will turn it off so that when I load new tables in there, it never get auto detected for the relationship. I go and manually change the relationship. Now, quickly talking about the date time. And just have a couple of other Power BI files here. So here I have a simple Power BI file which has a sales table with around 60,000 rows in here. And I have 3 different columns: sales date columns, order date, sales due date, and ship date. Now, what I've seen is people use these hierarchies, like as we can see in the sales table, we have this hierarchy in each date column. Where this is coming from, basically, if we have auto date time turned on, Power BI creates a hidden calendar table for each date column in the model. So basically right now, by default, there are 3 hidden date columns, date tables has been created, and this hierarchy is coming from those 3 tables. Now, the challenge with this one is that we don't have a common dimension in our model, and then there is if let's say if I want to see a report where I want to see the order received in a single month, and also want to see how many orders are due in this month, and also I want to see how many orders we are shipping in this month. If I don't have a common dimension, I cannot visualize the data. In this particular scenario, what I need to do is I need to use this date hierarchy is only for the due date. This is for the order date, and this for the ship date. I cannot see these 3 values on the same month, right? Because they don't have a common date dimension. So this table is coming from auto date time, and I've seen people start creating the measure. And what you will see is, for example, if I create a measure here, just quickly for the sample's sake, say calculate some sales amount, and then let's say I want to use a dates MTD, and then when people do due date, And now what they will use these after dot and all the stuff. This is coming from that hidden data set, and this is, and then they will say, okay, this does not work and all the stuff. Anytime you see this dot date and all those things after your date column, it means you have this hidden date time table which is you are working on, and that's, in my opinion, is the bad and worst thing in your model you can have, right? So you don't want hidden date tables to be used. And the second thing people I've seen is like, oh, they say, okay, you know what, I need this date column because there is a hierarchy, and I use that hierarchy in the visualization. But you can create your own calendar dimension, date dimension, and then you can create your own hierarchy the way you want. It does nothing stopping you to do that. So same report now, I have this in a different Power BI file. Here I have turned off my auto date time. So as you can see in this due date, there is no hierarchy in here, and there is no ship date, no hierarchy, and also on the auto date, no, because the auto date time is not turned off. So I added a date dimension in my model. Again, you can, this is wrong, should not be using calendar auto, and this is just a demo, and that's why I used it. Now, the biggest thing is always bring a date dimension. When you start a new project, bring a date dimension in your model. Doesn't matter how you bring it. You create through Power Query, it will come from your relational database, whether you're creating through DAX, the way it is created here, but there should always be a date dimension in your model. And as soon as you add a date dimension in your model, mark it as in a date table. Here I already marked it as a date table. And the reason behind that is the Power BI time intelligence functions. There are around 44 plus time intelligence function. They work, there is special functions which work with the date dimension, so which is marked as a date table. So do mark it as in a date table. Always add a date dimension, mark it as in a date table. And now, because we have a common dimension, and in the relationship, of course, we have a between date and sales. We have a active relationship because you can have only one active relationship between two tables, and others are inactive. And people also, now we have this inactive relationship. You should always use explicit measure. That's also one of my tips here. And then in the measures, you use a relationship to make inactive relationship to active, right? So in this particular case, I did the same thing, and now I can, at the year level, I'm looking at the total order amount and also the orders due in that year. And because I can see now on the 2011 on the same granularity, because I'm using the common dimension. Apart from all this stuff, the biggest thing, the achievement you happens with this thing is, which I've shown it many times. So this is a very small model, as you can see. When the auto date time is turned off, our model size is 493 kilobyte. It's so small. And when the auto date time was on, it was 2 megabytes. So approximately the model size has reduced by 75%, just removing that auto date time. And I did not lose any functionality. Rather I have a better functionality now. And my model size has gone down drastically. And if you guys remember, there's only 60,000 rows. So if you look at the 60,000 rows with the 3 date columns, our model size has gone like a 75% reduction. So such a big impact on it. I came across a real-time project where a model was around 3 gig in size, and they were using, they did not have a Power BI Premium at that time, and because 1 gig limit on Power BI Pro, they cannot load it. And then they said, okay, what we can do, should we use direct query and all that fun stuff? And when I look at the model, and there was around 25 different date columns and all different fact tables and whatnot. And that was the first thing. There was so many hidden date column date tables being created. And you guys would not believe, as soon as I removed the auto date time off and added the calendar dimension, of course, it's a best practice as a model. And the model size went down to around 700 megabyte. It came down from 3 gig to 700 megabyte with that small single change. And that was such a big impact. And now we were under 1 gig limit. And of course, now they are using premium capacity. But this is so important. It's like from the design perspective, from the performance perspective, from the usability perspective, scalability perspective, this is like one of the best things. And I recently started a series on YouTube purely on time intelligence, which I will be going deep into all these things on time intelligence. So this is all about settings and the time intelligence. So I think I'm going to run out of time. We should move fast. Any question before I move to the next section?
Yeah, I mean, there was another question from Raul, but maybe we'll leave it to the end. So, do you have an example that you could show where you can parameterize the number of rows to read in to the model? So you have a smaller dev model and a larger production model.
Yeah, I will show you at the end. Yes, there
Cool.
there is something which I can show.
Great,
for
thanks.
sure. Yeah, no problem. All right. So again, going back to data model, I'm not going to spend too much time on relationship. We just talked about like relationship. You should always auto detect off. That's you should do it, and then manually create the relationship and avoid cross filtering to both direction, right? Until there are certain reasons when you will do it, but do avoid it. Add date table, I think I already talked about it, why that is important, how does that make a difference, and we just saw a demo of that. Column categorization, summarization, and hierarchy. These are really important from the self-serve point of view. And let me actually quickly before rather than talking about this, so straight show all these things. So what I do is all the time when so the steps for me is when I'm working on Power BI reports is like create parameters, load the data, remove any extra columns we need if I needed to. If I'm using database system, I create the views. I always create the views, use those views. So now my data is in Power Query, data is loaded. Now, once the data is loaded and I have set the relationship and all the stuff, after all this is done, of course, calendar dimension is there, auto detect is turned off, all those things is done. Now we are at this point where we have all the relationship done, whatever the way it is we needed it to be. And next thing I always do is always go and turn column categorization. What does that means is like change, like if my country is a country type, web URL, image URL, I go to each column which I know they need to be set to the categorize whatever they're supposed to be. I always do that because once it is done first time, and I think I was discarding these changes. Once this is done first time, then you don't need to come back. And it is easier when you load the data. Let's say in this particular model, if I'm bringing another table in here, when that table gets loaded, I go through each column or whatever I need to do. I take action on the column, whether I need to change the categorization of the column, change the summarization of the column. What is summarization of the column is, let's say your sales table have a percentage discount. By default, it's a number, and Power BI is going to detect it as a number. And then if it's a number, it's going to summarization is going to be sum most of the time. There is no point summing the percentage discount column. So I will change the percent discount column summarization to do not summarize. Like for example, ID columns like product key. Let's say if this is a whole number type, and I'm never going to summarize this column. So I can actually summarize by none, and the data category what I change. Why I do it here in the relationship diagram, because you can select multiple columns. This is the I think we all know is the biggest design flaw in Power BI, which I guess with time will improve, because the fields behave differently when we are in table visual or in a report visual section. But when we are in a relationship, the behavior is different. This is here we can select multiple columns for whatever those measures. We can change their type. We can put them in different folders. We can change a summarization, whatever we want to do it. So I usually come to the relationship diagram because it is easy to work here, select all the columns, what I don't need to be summarized, and then I just change that summarization here. So I do those actions like summarization, categorization of the columns, and also create hierarchies. If I really need to create a hierarchy, as I mentioned, people say, okay, if I don't have the hidden table, I lost my hierarchy. You can always create your hierarchy. Here I have created year hierarchy is called year, quarter, month, date. Whatever the way you want, you can create, like maybe in geography, I have created a country and then state, and if there is a city postal code, I can create. So I do these things at the start, and to make sure that before it goes in the hands of the self-serve, becomes a data model. So the self-serve people who are going to use it, they have ease of use, and the functionality is great. And last thing is like to hide all the columns which you don't need. Now, first thing in Power Query, we remove the column which we don't want, but now we have the columns which we need, but they have no value in the visualization. Mainly like your keys column, which you are using to set the relationship between two tables, like in this case, product key, product subcategory key. These are only for the purpose of the relationship, but these columns does not have any other value, right? I'm now not going to visualize product key anywhere, and the value of this product key is to create the relationship between my sales table and that's pretty much it, right? So this is the relationship where the product key is getting used, but after that there is no value of this column. That is pretty much we can hide. So any column which you are not using in the visualization, and you should be always hiding it, right? So pretty much the fact tables is always hidden, because there's all the columns in the fact tables are either two type of columns, whether they are for the relationship purposes or for the purpose of summarization. And in the dimension table, all the key columns you should hide and just keep the columns which is going to be used in the visualization. Again, the thought process is like, if the column is not going to be visualized in any of the report, then just hide it. But maybe somebody says, no, we also like to, in our report, we show the product key. Let's say paginator reports you are creating, and you say, I want to show the product key there. Yes, then unfortunately you have to keep it visible. But the point here is, whenever you are loading the data in the model, all your relationship is done. Just hide the columns which you don't need. End of the day, you have a very clean model, which is for the self. I always look into, okay, this model which I'm creating today is not for creating a 1 or 2 reports. What I'm working on tomorrow, this model will grow up, and other people will be able to connect with it, and then they will be able to use and visualize to self-serve. So it's very, very, it's more about thinking from the scalability point of view, from the usability point of view. So always hide those columns. All right, I think I have one more section to cover. Let's see, we have a very little time left, so I'm gonna cruise through, but I will try to be, I'm open to stay longer, but again, I don't know about others. And so these are the things we talk about: summarization, hierarchy, and hide unwanted columns. And visualization, of course, at the end of the day, whatever we do, we create a great model. We create, we have a very sleek model. We have a very efficient model, but the end user or the management or the leadership is all about what they're going to see at the data, right? So when I started a project with any of the client, the first thing I do is always create a theme file. I always begin with that, right? Because if you have your corporate colors, your marketing department, give me the colors, and then I will create a theme file, all right? And then create a theme file, always start with that. And then I always create a template. Why I create a template? Template contains the basic look and feel, which is I usually get approved by the customer I'm working with. So we know the colors. Okay, this is going to be how the logo look like. This is where the slices is going to be. So pretty much try to keep the design or wireframe done, and then create the template. So now template has the theme file. So when I work with the clients, when this part is done up to the report templates, anytime I start a new report, I just start from that template, because it contains the design, it has the color, it has everything. Like, for example, when I do my own blog post or my own things, I have created a template file for myself as well. So every time I start, maybe it's not a very great looking, but whatever it is, it keeps the same design all the time. Let me quickly show you. So for example, here, I'm going to open my template file. So this is what I have done. So I have all my colors, my logo, my title, and everything is done at a single place all the time. And then any sample or demo file I want to create, I start with this file. So here I have a title. So I put as part of my template file. So this is a sample, and in my sample data file, I also have I load the sample data. So I provided here where I'm going to load the data from. Maybe in your case that is not required, but in this case I load the data. So whenever I'm doing a demo, I start from my template file, which has every basic fundamentals in there, the design and look and feel. So as you can see, it loaded all the data. It has my logo, whatever I wanted to do, and also has the color theme, whatever I decided to use, and the title shows up in here. So I begin with this, and then it becomes very, very easy. So why it is important? What I found is if the designs are really a similar look and feel, the adoptability of these reports are much higher than, like, if you're creating a one time your company logo is here, the title is somewhere on the right, and it doesn't matter what is right or wrong design is, whatever the design is, wherever the logo need to be. But if it is consistent between the reports, the adoptability of the reports is very, very, very high. And I have seen that because people expect where the slicers is going to be, where they are going to look into the information, where are the filter, if you're not using slicers, okay, there are going to be a filter, where you can columns in the filter, which you can use to filter the data, or there could be, KPIs, where those KPIs would be. So there's a design pattern which you want to follow. And I've seen people love that. It's the learning curve to consume the files is much, much easier. And again, the self-serve people, if they are not a Power BI guys, but they want to visualize the data, they have the templates, they start with the template, and then everything is already in place for them, and then they just visualize the data. So always create a template. And again, explicit measure, as I mentioned, this is a lot more discussed already. So never ever use measures columns directly into your visualization. I've seen people do this. If I'm here in my report, I go to my calendar table, let's say bring the month, and then I go to my sales table, for example. Even this is hidden, so I directly go and drop the sales amount in here. Don't do that. So this is implicit measures. What is happening here is the sales amount is getting summed up, and always create your explicit measure, because then you have the business logic in there. You can cascade the measures, so one measure for the other measures and all that stuff. So never use direct columns in your reports. It does not take that long to create the measures, so always create the measures. And then give the formatting to the measures, like what it's going to be. Like if you create the measures, it's a currency, make sure decimal places are done correctly and all that fun stuff. So all these things, these are tiny things, but once these become a part of your data development, part of your routine, you will see a lot more values come out of it in the long run. That things becomes very, very easy for the management point of view. One other thing which I really like to talk about is hide visual headers for slicer text box. Like sometimes I've seen there are like a lot of visuals, and maybe go back to my report here quickly. Is this one? No, not that one. Did I close it? Maybe I did. Yeah, this one. Okay, so just in this particular report, I have some text column showing some things here, and then this quick insight, this label, that logo, these slices and all the stuff. Usually I turn off all the visual headers in this, because in the slicer the visual header doesn't mean it's just annoying. Like when you are using the reader's point of view, the user point of view, just these icons show up in there. Like, yes, if there is a need to see those icons, then for sure, in my opinion, like I usually turn this off. And if I go here in the visual headers, I turn these guys off and don't need it. If I really need a selective one, I can then of course turn it on and select the one which I need. But by default, my prefer on certain kind of visuals, those text boxes, KPI cards, because there is no value in there, and then you really want to turn those off. It just make the report consumption from the end user point of view a little bit more cleaner and better. And last but not least, avoid visual level filter. Again, this is not right or wrong. This is what I prefer. I don't like to have a, let's say in one report, you have a visual level, you have a multiple visuals. For example, in this one, we have a multiple visuals. And if we have a visual level filter in this one and not in this one, when they interact with each other, and if the user doesn't know that a visual level filter has been applied on this one, unless you put a blurb or some message in there, then they don't know why these results are not working as expected. Because I've seen people say, okay, you know, this everything is working fine, but this visual is not working, and the reason turned out to be they applied some visual level filter which they don't know. If you need to apply a visual level filter, maybe write another measure in which you can put that logic and then use that in the visual, or put a message on the somewhere. Okay, this particular measure is filtered for whatever reason. I try to avoid a visual level filters because I get burned my fingers many times because having those try to detect what's going on, why this is not working, and turn out to be there is a visual level filter. But again, there's nothing right or wrong in here. I mean, if that's what is required to achieve the goal, then of course you have to do that. But try to avoid that if possible. All right, I guess there are certain useful. I will share this with Gavin and Catherine, and they can share it with you guys. I will share like the relationship and all that stuff, and a couple of things on the color scheme which I wanted to talk about. If the marketing team does not have, company doesn't have marketing team, doesn't have the color scheme, I usually go to these websites I've mentioned in here, like this grab color website. I give the URL of the company, and what it does is it brings the colors back. Then I get the hex code from here. Basically, I want the design to be the reports to be company feel like they own the report, right? It's their reports. So you want to start on a right foot. You want to start to give them. So now here I give my company's URL, and it detects the colors, and then you can use those colors. So there's a tons of sites like that, and you can actually do this kind of stuff from there. All right, and let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, no, oh, perfect. I reached the last slide. Oh my God, I made it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys, and really do provide a feedback. And if there's any question, I'm open to hang around here, and depending if everyone else is available. But thank you.
We can go for a little bit longer. Well, I'll stop the recording for now.